Let's say I'm 16 right now, which would be, I would think, a good time because you're kind of mature enough and you kind of make so you can make some decisions. What would be your advice or your strategy or your thought process to start developing a life in which you develop the sense of meaning more so than other things?
Right. So I think the thing to put an emphasis on is to put emphasis on transforming your practices as opposed to just transforming your beliefs. All culture puts a lot of emphasis on changing people's beliefs. Not because that's irrelevant, I don't say that, but I think it's insufficient. I think most of the meaning-making machinery is not taking place at the level of sort of propositional knowledge. I think it's taking place at procedural, perspectival, participatory knowing. And so you need practices. And I would recommend thinking about cultivating an ecology of practices, trying to find practices that have well-established traditions behind them, and if possible, any relevant scientific research attached to them that gives you a clear understanding of the relative strengths and weaknesses of the practices, and then set them together into an overall system so the strengths and weaknesses, right, are in trade-off relationships. They compensate and balance for each other. And so I think you should engage in mindfulness practices and develop a lot of important attentional skills. You should do both meditative practices in which you're looking inward, contemplative practices in which you're looking outward. I think you should do a lot of movement practices. There's clear, and this is something that needs to be emphasized, the role of the way the brain is embodied in a sensory, motor, living, interaction with the world is very important. So movement practices are very important, like martial art.
Like dancing, martial arts.
Dancing, martial art. I think you want to engage in practices, and this is, fortunately for this, there's quite a bit of really good scientific research around this. You want to engage in practices in improving your inference, like your inference machinery, how you use inference to alter your belief. Because again,
so what does that mean?
What does that mean? So that means paying attention to all of the very good cognitive psychology by people like Stanovich and others, saying, what you need to do is look for ways in which the cognitive biases that are built into human intelligence, that are adaptive, nevertheless can be misapplied and thwart when you're thinking or reflecting or reasoning about things, and thereby undermine your goal of trying to get the truest beliefs you can. And so what you want to do is you want to learn about those biases. Here's one, confirmation bias. I only look for evidence that confirms my chosen beliefs, the beliefs I like, right? There's many of these. You have to learn to look for these biases and then learn to try to actively counteract them in your life. So I would recommend the pursuit of active open-mindedness is what it's called. But of course, as I mentioned, your attentional processes can also be a source of self-deception. So you need mindfulness for that. All right, understanding, right, the way in which your body, and I mean your lived body, is fitting you to the world can also be a potential source of self-deception that you need to bring expertise, reflective expertise. I don't mean just theory. I mean you keep practicing until you get those insights. It's, yes, right. When I'm this way in my body, for example, I tend towards this pattern of behavior, things like that. You also want to practice training your perspectival knowing.
So what does that mean?
So your perspectival, so I have a perspective right now, right? So things are salient to me. You're standing out to me, more stuff, and you're foregrounded, stuff is backgrounded, right? And it's constantly flowing. And within that salience network, or salience landscape, as I like to call it, getting the term originally from Ramachandran, right? There's a pattern of obviation. Things are made obvious to me. Like I should look at your face. I shouldn't be looking here, right? That's obvious, right? But obviousness is not part of the physics. The salience landscape and the obvious. But the thing is, we also know that what we find salient and what we find obvious can be used to manipulate us. We can use it to deceive ourselves because, right, we can judge the wrong things as obvious. We can find the wrong things salient, right? So we need to practice paying attention to how we generate our perspectives. Part of that is our mindfulness practice, but part of it is also practicing taking other people's perspectives, and especially taking on the perspectives of people we deem to be more rational, to be more wise. This is how you came to have the cognitive maturity you have. You've internalized the perspectives of
other people,
and often older, mature people. And so choosing as best you can, I mean, it's a bootstrapping problem, and there's always the possibility of error in there, and there's no way of escaping that, okay? But choosing as best you can, what you want to do is choose individuals who have good, for whom you have good reason to believe they demonstrate a rationality of attention or inference or action.
The outcomes that you're looking for.
Well, the outcomes, but also that the outcomes are systematic in their lives.
So they're not just chance or flukes. Okay.
And then you make it a practice of trying to reverse engineer for yourself what it would be like to see the world the way they did, such that they could act the way they do. And so I take certain people and I try to reverse engineer sets of practices that will bring about transformations of consciousness and cognition that will, I think, allow me to at least plausibly live like, for example, or see or behave. And I don't mean this, I hope this is not understood arrogantly, but the way Socrates did or something like that. And then try to practice that until it starts to become second nature, becomes part of my metacognitive machinery. And then also participatory knowing. I need to put myself in places, ritual context, that's the best word for it, where real significant transformation is possible for me. I think that has to be chosen extremely carefully.